There we go, that's the recording started. If you wouldn't mind updating your name in Zoom so it shows your name and your organisation, that would be great. You can do that. There's usually, if you hover over your own picture, there's three little dots in the corner. You click on that and you click rename and you can update your name so we know who we've got in the room. There's a chat facility in Zoom. Please use that throughout the session. We do have a Q&A segment at the towards the end of today's webinar. So post your questions in the Q&A. We'll pick some of those up in the chat as we go along, and then we will ask some of those questions directly to our Northern Power Grid and NESO experts at the end of the session. Okay, so before we get started, we are just going to get started with an initial poll. So these webinars ran annually. So we did run one of these sessions last year where we asked this poll to everyone who attended, and we're just really interested to see how views have potentially changed over that time. So if you wouldn't mind taking part in the poll, that will pop up on your screen in a moment. Emily, could you launch that poll, please? Just to let us know what low carbon technologies you currently own. If you launch that poll, Emily, there we go. Okay. So if you just really appreciate if you just take a moment to complete the poll, then we can get a sense in the room of low carbon technology adoption amongst the audience. Everyone's been very speedy completing that. Thank you. Just give that one more moment to enable everyone to answer it. It is a multi-choice question, so please select all of the technologies that you do own. Okay, it's slowed a bit down there, so I will end the poll there and share the results with you all. So in terms of our low carbon technologies owned, so we've got 49% of the room selecting at least one of the options. The most popular responses being electric vehicle with 26% and rooftop solar PV with 24% there. So thank you very much for that, everyone. That was really interesting to see that. So I am now going to hand over to Gillian Williamson from Northern Power Grid to set out the objectives and today's agenda.
Thanks, Rebecca. If we can advance the slide, that'd be great. Thank you. Yeah, so hello, everybody. I'm Gillian Williams, and I'm Head of System Forecasting at Northern Power Grid. And I really do believe, just as some of those poll results showed us, we are standing at the brink of an energy revolution. And really, it's not future any longer. It's not just a dream, it is a reality in making. So I'm pleased to present our 7th Distribution Future Energy Scenarios, our DFES, which explores the possibilities of that future, allowing us to check whether we're on track and whether we're ready for net zero. So thank you for attending what I trust you're going to find an informative session. And as I always do, I presumptively say thank you for your participation in advance. So today we're going to explain how we've enhanced this year's DFES forecast to meet local needs, and how our DFES was created in association with independent specialist CRM, but also in association with you, with our stakeholders, and also how we're using it. So I'll be handing over to Matt Langham. Matt has the pleasure of drawing out some of the detailed findings from our DFES. He's one of our system forecasting engineers and worked alongside expert in forecasting, Mary Black. Mary is on hand to answer any questions in the chat, and she's also got Katie Privet, our Regional Insights Manager, on hand to help out with those questions. Now, if you've attended any of Northern Power Grid's previous webinars, you might have already met our talented Ryan Tomlin. He's on hand today to give you a demo of how to use DFES data through our open data portal. And that's a brilliant way for looking at charts and maps really easily of that data. Also today, we're pleased and honoured to welcome Melanie Taylor. Mel is the new head of RESP regions for the North, and she's going to speak about NESO's implementation of the Regional Energy Strategic Plans, RESPs. DFES is going to be an important input to those plans, leveraging the regional stakeholder driven and holistic and granular DFES methodologies that we've developed really over the last decade. Last but not least, your participation is really important to us because it's users' feedback that's key to informing our improvements. So please let us know what you think. We will be sharing contact details at the end, but yeah, put your comments in the chat along with your questions. Tell us if you've got any suggestions of how we can improve things. We'd love to know how useful our forecasts are in your planning. And what improvements you would suggest to our DFES. Can we go on to the next slide, please, Rebecca? Now, really what I've discussed there is outline the agenda. So the running order will be Matt, Ryan, and then Mel following me. But we've left plenty of time for questions. So please feel free to leave those in the chat. I say where Mary and Katie and the Regional Insights team may be able to answer them as we go along. So we can jump on, please, Rebecca. Because if we go on to the next slide, I am conscious that DFES is reaching out to a wider audience year on year. So we've got 200 stakeholders with us today. And I'm conscious that some of you may be new users of DFES. So forgive me if you're a DFES expert, because I am going to try and start by explaining what DFES is in simple terms. So distribution, future, energy scenarios. These are our long-term forecasts of the expected uptake of low carbon technologies for our region, for the North East and Yorkshire, all the way to 2050. So our DFES predicts where, when, and how many electric vehicles and heat pumps our customers will adopt. But also, we additionally forecast the location and timing and capacity of distributed generation, battery storage, and customer flexibility. Also part of our DFES, we translate those numbers of electric vehicles and heat pumps. We translate them into electrical demand and electrical energy so that we can be using that in our planning. We've got 5 scenarios. 4 of them use the same names as the national FES. 3 of those meet net zero. And then we have a 5th scenario, which is unique to Northern Power Grid and our region's ambition to net zero. So what can you expect as the outputs? Well, DFES outputs include more than 160,000 data points, a report and a methodology. And for your convenience, we share that output at local authority level, but we also split it according to our network assets from the very top for our whole region and the high voltages all the way down to the forecast that we create for the low voltage secondary substations of the type that you might find at the end of your street. Can we move on to the next slide, please, Becca? Because I'd just like to touch on why we forecast. So we forecast our customers' needs and the electrical demands for our network so that we can check how it can cope in the future to ensure that our network keeps pace and is available when our customers need it. We have multiple scenarios because there are uncertainties about how local, how fast, and how flexible the future will be. We use those forecasts in creating our network capacity headroom report. It's part of the network development plan. Again, you can find it in our open data portal, and it gives an indicative view of the capacity available on our network all the way to 2050 if you're considering a connection or if you're considering providing a service. Also, by sharing our forecast, the forecasts that underpin our network development decisions, we're ensuring transparency in that key data input. It allows stakeholders to understand the rationale behind our decisions and themselves assess the timeliness and the cost efficiency. Also, we share our DFES because we think this is important information that can help you understand what net zero means to our region and helps informs perhaps your next steps or your policy and your decision making. The next slide, I just want to explain a bit the context. A nice graph. Over the last 15 years, the peak demand on our network has reduced. Deindustrialization and customer efficiency measures, it's gone down, but we have seen the first uptick this year. Now, maybe that's a leading edge indicator of an increase in electricity associated with decarbonisation. We'll have to wait and see, but it's certainly beginning to see something happening. Our 2024 DFES has also been affected by changes in regional and national support for decarbonisation and economic growth. Regionally, we've seen more local area energy plans being developed and started. Perhaps another 6 will be available later on this year. But also we've seen local power plans, local growth plans, and also the expanding role of the metro mayors, all supporting decarbonisation. Whilst nationally, we've seen the new government support for net zero through the Clean Power Initiative and NESO and RESP and GB Energy. And also the connections reform is supporting decarbonisation. All of these are shaping the future and our DFES outcomes. We can move on to the next slide, please, Rebecca, because this is what I refer to the petrol gauge, which is very inappropriate, but this is the FES chart. And these show the scenarios that all DNOs are following from what the FES pathways have set out. As I say, we've got there 4. It's the first time that we're modelling this new framework. What we've got is the holistic transition scenario. It achieves net zero through high levels of electrification and hydrogen for industrial clusters. In electric engagement, net zero is met through electrification, lots of electric vehicles and heat pumps, and high levels of customer flexibility. Hydrogen evolution, the title says it there. Hydrogen is used in this scenario for domestic heating, where we have got hydrogen being used in industrial clusters. And then we've got our reference scenario. Now, this one's a bit different because this one's built on the latest policy positions that the new government announced or is speculating that happened just a few days after the FES. So the reference scenario is our opportunity to bring the policy position right up to date. Now, the 5th scenario is a counterfactual and it misses net zero. So we can move on to the next slide. So I just want to talk about some of the enhancements that we've made. Now, we have, as ever, we have enhanced our base data using the latest DVLA numbers for electric vehicles, using the latest census data. But this year, by the far, the greatest enhancements that we've made is through the incorporation of regional plans, strengthening the local relevance of our DFES to give confidence that our ultimate network development is ready to meet the region's needs. So locally informed DFES has always been critical to Northern Power Grid, and our approach is very much from a bottom-up methodology that's starting at postcode level, considering building stocks on each street to inform when and where those low carbon technologies will be adopted. But further enhancement comes from the incorporation of intelligence on regional plans. Got a few numbers here to illustrate the value that we have received from yourselves as stakeholders through our regional insights team, who are due to become 8 from the current 17 members very shortly. They've engaged with all of the local authorities in our region. We've got information on 350,000 new homes, 7,000 hectares of industrial commercial developments, and they work with over 100 organisations to understand their strategic plans. And they're already on with further engagement to get more detail on those strategic regional needs that we're going to be sharing with the NESO, as they'll be a key component of the RESP. So that's a little bit about how we've done things differently in the context of our DFES. So I'm pleased at this point to hand over to Matt. Thanks, Matt, to talk us through some of the results we've seen.
Excellent, thank you. So just before we go into the results, I might be the one speaking to you about them, but it has been a massive collaborative effort between a lot of people to put these together. So thanks to everyone who has helped prepare that. So if you could move on to the next slide, please, Rebecca. So EVs, one of the fastest growing technologies on our network. We've had a huge number of those registered just last year. It increased our population of EVs by about 2/3 again, compared to like all-time stats. And that's just going to carry on going up, we think. So just a bit of wording around this graph. The red line is the Northern Power Grid reference scenario. This models policy support, such as the zero emission vehicle mandate. And it trends to the same endpoint as low modal shift, which is people not giving up their cars. That's why the lines diverge at the far end from the FES-linked scenarios. So we don't really think we're going to get many more EVs, but we think we're going to get them earlier. We think we're going to get about 4 in 10 cars on our network, about 1.7 million by 2030. And nearly every car in our license area will be an electric vehicle by about 2050. If you could advance to the next slide, please, Rebecca. So heat pumps, they're another commonly emerging low carbon technology. Uptake has been lower than projected, despite strong policy support. There's a generous financial grant from the government through the boiler upgrade scheme of £7,500 should you wish to install one. That has driven uptake slightly, but not to the levels we need to see. There's about 1 in 100 homes have one at present, and it needs to be more like 1 in 10 by 2030 to be able to say we're on track for that delivery. In terms of longer term policy, by 2035, we are anticipating a phase out of domestic gas. That's why the line rises there. There is no hard and fast policy yet. We are waiting for a decision on hydrogen in the domestic environment there. Future modelling will reflect that, but I will stress that this was policy at the time. Next slide, please. Domestic solar. This is trending steadily upwards. By 2030, we reckon about 1 gigawatt of domestic solar will be installed on our network. That's a lot. That's 20 large solar farms worth. And we've already got about half that on the network now. And there's no particularly strong policy support for it. It's just after years of support making it viable to install, technology is improved, prices come down. It now makes economic sense to install one without that policy support. It's a bit of a success story in terms of decarbonisation. So yes, we have seen fewer installs last year than projected, about 18 rather than 70 megawatts. It's something to keep an eye on to see if that continues or if installs pick up again. And the next slide, please. So the energy consumption trend, kind of as everything in our area becomes increasingly electric, we expect demand to go up. That is just how it will work. That's offset slightly by energy efficiency improvements. As Jill mentioned in the peak demand trends, that's one of the drivers of a fall in demand that we've seen. is devices getting more efficient over time. We don't expect that to stop happening, but we expect it to slow the rate of rise rather than continue to drive a fall from now. So like an almost doubling of demand by 2050 and a 17% increase by 2030 is anticipated. One of the main reasons why our forecast is slightly higher than the FES linked scenarios is that strong EV growth. They're one of the main drivers of increased energy consumption on our network. Next slide, please. So peak demand. This is sensitive to customer behaviour and time of use. As people's behaviours may change or may not change, we will see changes in our shape of assumed profile. And depending on when people choose to use energy, this can have an impact on the peak demand far more than just more low carbon technologies on the network. So to use a non-electrical analogy, say you've got 50 people all go into the shops throughout the day, you've got a low peak occupancy. If they all decide to go at 6 o'clock in the evening, you've got a high peak occupancy. And the overall demand hasn't changed, but when it's being requested has. And that is why we see a large increase in peak demand as people install EVs, heat pumps, but don't necessarily shift their use. We do model time of use tariffs, so peak pricing, people shifting their demand to avoid that. But by and large, peak demand is forecast to increase by almost twice as much as the underlying consumption by 2030, a 35% increase rather than a 17% increase. Long-term, hydrogen evolution overtakes our reference scenario, and that is because of that lower levels of consumer flexibility in that scenario. We predict quite a high level of consumer engagement, people wanting to flex their demand either financially or just because, and hydrogen evolution predicts less. If we could move on to the next slides, please. So something else we've done differently this year, our bottom-up modelling is really granular. It goes down to lower level super output area, and that lets us model or postcode level. We're porting between the two. That lets us model things on like the neighbourhood basis or collections of a few hundred to a few thousand people. This has let us find out areas which have low uptake of low carbon technologies. So over on the right, reproduced with permission from ERM, is a chart showing the 25% of lowest EV uptake in our areas. And what we're seeing is it's either very rural or very urban that are behind the rest of our region in terms of adopting these technologies. We're going to share this data with other local stakeholders to make sure that no one is left behind in that decarbonisation and make sure that it works for everyone. I think next slide, please. So next steps, Clean Power 2030, that's the big one. That is going to change our generation connection pipeline into, as that gets enacted. We will model that when it comes along. The Transitional Regional Energy Strategic Plan, we will model that when it's ready for our region. We will make sure that we're working together. FES is likely to move to every 3 years with interim updates. We will continue accordingly. And we've also done a bit of work to understand people as well as the buildings that they live and work in, and where like that could inform further an extra dimension to our modelling. So not just is it a house, is it an office, but what are the people like in that building? And my final slide, please. So where and how to get the results. We have our open data portal. This is our basically one-stop shop for all our data offerings. Please do visit that. Not only is it easy to get a load of data there, it's easy to join them together, but I won't steal too much of Ryan's thunder on that one. We publish on Data Mill North in collaboration with other users, and Open Innovations hosts a visualization tool that lets you play with it on a map by parameter, by scenario, and year by year. Very useful if you just want a quick view of an individual parameter. So if I hand over to Ryan now, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Matt. Good morning, everyone. I am Ryan Tomlin. I'm also Assistant Forecasting Engineer, but whereas Matt specializes in DFES, I am our lead on open data. So I'm going to just take over the screen share now, give it a couple of seconds to load, and introduce those of you who haven't seen it to our open data portal, and take you through how you interact with DFES on here. So this is the homepage of our open data portal. You can navigate to here just by searching Northern Power Grid Open Data into Google. It should be the top result. If not, there are links on our external website if you cannot find it. At the top here, we have feature pages. So I'm going to click on here. Plenty of data to look at, but for today, I'm going to type in DFES and take you through our DFES feature page. So we start off with an introduction to DFES, as well as an introduction to the 5 new for us FES scenarios, as well as if you have any doubts, there is also a link to contact the Regional Insights team, which we've heard plenty about today. If you want to get in touch, if you think you have some information for them, or they could be of help to you in any of your plans. We then move on into more of what's actually in our DFES. So as already Joe's discussed, we've enhanced our DFES from a data point of view, but also from a usability point of view. So we have 3 different types of files of DFES on our portal this year. We have the DFES whole network file. This is the file that you'd be familiar if you've worked with DFES in the past. We then have DFES by local authority in a new format, which we'll look at in a second, and DFES by voltage split, also in a new format. These are split by our EHV voltage substations. So the one we'll do as a demo is the local authorities. So if I click this link, it will take me to the data set for the local authority DFES. Main difference on here, if anyone has used it in the past, we've had years as columns.
We don't have this level of detail on our data. We don't.
Anyone who's ever used a DFES in the past will have the year in columns. Anyone who's used time series data before will know that is not the norm. So this year, to make the data more portal and tool friendly, we have the year in one column with the parameters as columns as go along. The years are available as filters. You can filter for local scenario. You can filter for your scenario here and your local authority here. What this allows us to do on the portal now is that we can build some of the graphs that you've seen throughout the presentation. So if you go to Analyze tab, it's already set up. So if you use this last drop down here, you can quite easily flick between them, pick from EVs, the number of heat pumps, and so on and so on. And this will change. If you pick County Durham, this will just be the numbers for County Durham. Now, you can do that if you have one particular thing you're interested in, or we have built a series of dashboards for each of these files to sort of do this for you. So in here, we have graphed everything we deem as the most important parameters. We've taken out 1 or 2 just to save loading. So we split them into different sections. We start with electric vehicle forecasts. So these are all our parameters for electric vehicles, both in terms of volumes and in terms of power. Electric heating forecasts, so all the numbers to do with heat pumps. Generation forecasts, so all the numbers to do with both renewable and non-renewable generation. And we also include storage in here, which I know technically not generation, but just for this ease of navigating, it is found in generation forecasts. Demand forecasts, and then finally, some of them have customer numbers, just as we predict the rise of customers going up, and there's a data table at the bottom. At the top, you can filter for local authorities, scenarios, and years. Anyone who's from a combined authority here, you can select multiple local authorities. So if you are covering multiple regions, I'm not going to do a real one, but you could select these 3, for example. You'd be a strange combined authority, but you'd be one. And that will change the graphs. It will redraw them all if you give it a second, because there's a lot of data to pull through. And it'll pull through them all, and you will have those there. If I go back to the feature page now, we have all those 4 dashboards are available on our feature page through here. So local authority, primary, BSP, GSP. We have also embedded the geographic visual, which is available from the ODI site, which again, if you ever want to navigate to that, if you go to the top, other sites, there's a DFES link here, which will take you to our ODI visualization, but you can also interact with it on our portal. On here, again, you can pick your scenario, you can pick your parameters, and you can pick your view between local authorities and primary substations. And then you have a bar where you can go through the years and see how the situation changes. You can click in any of these shapes at any point to get a breakdown of our substations in these points, and also the raw value at the top there, the 434,000 value. So we've made large steps to try and increase the interactivity with DFES on our portal. So So I encourage people to go on and have a go. If you have any feedback, if you find bits that work, bits that don't work, bits that don't give you quite what you need, please just get in touch with opendata@northernparagon.com. Some of you are probably new to Open Data. There's a whole bunch of data on our portal. I don't have time to go through it now. We do various other webinars with explaining Open Data. I'm going to start doing various posts on my LinkedIn on what's available on our Open Data, so you can follow me there, and I will be doing posts throughout the year on what's available and try to flag some of the big flagship products we have so that you can have a go. But I encourage everyone to just go and have a play at first. But like I said, find DFES, feature pages, and then you can find DFES on here. And I will leave it there because I'm handing over to Mel for her section now. So I will stop sharing.
Thank you, Ryan. And I think there's just some slides on the way. Thank you, Rebecca. So, hi everybody. I could have done this without a slide. I've forgotten that this is where we start. It's my name is Melanie Taylor. I'm the head of RESP regions for the north of Great Britain. So my patch covers Scotland, the north of England, and the Midlands for the National Energy Systems Operator. Next slide, please. Thank you. So just very briefly for anybody who's new to the National Energy Systems Operator, we are an independent body that's owned by government. We're a company owned by government, but we are independent from government and also independent from industry. And our role is both as the operator and an independent advisor to government on the future of the energy system. Next slide, please. We've been in a transition over the course of last year. That transition effectively ended last year as we moved from the energy systems operator in National Grid to this independent body. Many of the roles that we had previously we've taken with us. So, for example, Gillian had mentioned earlier the future energy scenarios. That's something that's come with us over to NESO. But we've got a broader range of responsibilities as well. So a whole range of new strategic energy planning responsibilities, and critically the key difference being that these are now whole systems energy planning responsibilities. And I'll come back to those in a moment, as well as a range of operational responsibilities, and that includes things like connections, and many of you will be aware of the connections reform process that's happening at the moment. That's one of NESO's key priorities right now. One of the other big things that we've done in the first few months of being NESO is another thing that Jill mentioned earlier. So that was CP3. Clean Power 2030. So we provided the independent advice to government on how to reach that ambition. Thank you. Super. So I mentioned that NESO have taken on or been given a new range of strategic energy planning responsibilities. And there's a number of new products, if you like, for want of a better word, that we'll be producing as part of that. So perhaps we'll start up at the top there. There's the Strategic Spatial Energy Plan. So that's a national plan that will answer the question of within zones across Great Britain, what do we need in terms of particularly major energy generation. And what does the system need to be able to operate, both to get us to 2030 and beyond 2030. Linked to that then will be the Centralised Strategic Network Plan. That's about the transmission network and what transmission network do you need in order to be able to deliver the Strategic Spatial Energy Plan. And the final piece of the puzzle, and the one that I'm obviously most interested in, is the regional energy strategic plans. And those are really the final piece of the puzzle in strategic energy planning. And they're seeking to answer that question of how do you create an energy system that both works at a national level and is also responsive to the needs and ambitions of communities at the local level. And what we're seeking to do in RESP is find that sweet spot in between. Next slide, please. So very briefly, I'm conscious I'm swiftly running out of time, but there'll be 11 RESP regions. So regions in which we'll create a RESP. The one relevant to today's conversation is the Northeast, which is a pretty good map of Northern Power Grid's network area. It's very much a collaborative process. The whole idea is that these plans are locally generated, so there'll be specific governance established and engagement mechanisms established to make sure that it's a collaborative effort between ourselves, the networks, local government, and other local actors within the energy system. Next slide, please. I won't talk to this slide in too much detail. I don't have enough time, but there are a number of elements to the RESP. The first is a regional energy vision, which, as the name on the tin suggests, sets out what the ambition for energy is within that region. The second is regional pathways, so the way that different energy vectors might change over the course of getting to net zero. Spatial system need will look at where the major strategic sites are, and then a regional geospatial energy plan will bring all of those together into a spatial plan for the region that brings all of those elements together. And then finally, and critically, a social impact assessment that looks at what benefits brings, and potentially what risks as well, and how we seek to mitigate those. Next slide, please. So just very briefly then on milestones, I'm going to start at the end and work back. The first full RESPs will be published in 2027, but there's a number of really important interim milestones before then. The first one is that, as I think it was Matt mentioned, we'll be working very closely with the electricity networks and stakeholders from across the energy system over the course of this year to produce an output that supports the ED3 business planning process. So that will be a sort of interim output that's specifically designed to support that process. And we will be running a variety of engagement events that we really hope people on this call will be part of, both to support that process and also to collaborate with us on the design of what the end product, the full RESP in 2027 looks like. So the first opportunity to feed into that will be regional forums, which will start in the spring, and there'll be more information coming out on those very shortly. And I'll pause there rather than cutting any further into question time.
Fantastic. Thanks very much for that, Mel. As I mentioned in the chat, we will share the slides after the session as well, along with the recording. We'll move into the Q&A. So the first question that I'm going to ask is for you, Mel. So have the Strategic Spatial Energy Plan and RESPs been subject to sustainability appraisal or strategic environmental assessment?
Well, no, because they don't exist yet. So there's nothing to it. There's nothing to assess as yet. But I mentioned that one of the outputs of RESP will be a social impact assessment. We need to design that, and it's something that we'll want to design in collaboration with stakeholders. So we'll really appreciate views on that and best practice. But yeah, it's early days.
Brilliant. Thanks for that, Mel. And I'm not sure if this is a question for you or maybe Jill, or maybe you will both have a view. But the question is, do you anticipate any shift in share between commercial and residential solar?
I'm going to let Jill take that one.
Can you take that one, please, Jill?
I can come in on that one, Rebecca.
Thank you.
So in our DFES, we do model both commercial and larger scale solar. Now, that is on the basis of how we are modelling the affordability and the practicality of that residential and also the land availability for the industrial. So when we look at our domestic uptake, we are seeing something like 20,000 homes per year adopting domestic rooftop solar. That is significantly higher than what we understand has been connected, for example, in the last year. And I bet Matt might have that figure. That
Jill, I can't hear you anymore.
number at his fingertips
There we go.
achieve those targets. It is a challenge, Rebecca, to get that 20,000 homes. So there could be some swapping because at the end of the day, we are moving to a target of renewable energy by 2030.
Brilliant. Thanks for that, Jill. Question for you, Mel. Have the could RESP and SEP affect the phase 2 gate 2 grid queue, which will be formed this year in any way?
Yeah, so I'll just take a step back on that one. What both well, SEP and RESP will do is identify strategically what the need is for different balances of technologies on strategically on the energy system. It is absolutely the case that we know within the queues, particularly at transmission level, that there's more in the queue than we will ever need. And so there's a process of connections reform happening at the moment to move us away from a first come, first served approach to this to a more strategic approach that says, actually, what is it that the system needs and where. So there will be a relationship between both the spatial strategic energy plan and the RESPs and how we deal with the queues and what technologies can go on where. I don't. The reason I'm what I would say, and I can come back, and if there's any other questions as well that I can't give a full answer to, is I'm not sure on the timings between specific points in the queue and specific documents. So I can't quite answer the question that's asked, but let me go back and double check that.
Brilliant. Thanks for that, Mel. Question for you, Jill, from Simon Green. How are DNOs to meet 2025 to 2030 demand pull from industry, and also how to integrate the rise of private wire to meet the current void?
So first of all, DFES is one of our key tools to be able to provide that capacity. And it's accompanied by our engagement. So Simon, I know that we're still hoping to meet up and talk about the Humber Freeport requirements there so that we can feed it into our forecasting and feed it into the TRESP as mentioned by Mel there. What we are doing by 2030, we will be into a new price control regulatory period from 2028. The reason why we are so keen to understand the strategic regional needs is that we are seeing a transition within the regulatory framework to be more accommodating to strategic needs, to make sure that the capacity is there when needed, rather than our customers needing to wait. And that is the main reason we've got a regional insights and we're doing the engagement around forecasting. And that's how we are going to accommodate that additional demand. Rising private wire, equally, they're still connecting to either the distribution or the transmission network, and we still need that foresight so that we can plan that in, so that we can look at the deliverability and make sure that understanding the regional needs, that we can enable them.
Brilliant. Thanks for that, Jill. Another question for you, Jill, which has been answered in the chat, but it might be useful for the room, is just to give a little bit more detail on the methodology that's used for forecasting future.
Yeah, and I'll let Matt come in if there's anything additional to add. First of all, if you're interested in the detail, I know it's in the chat there. We do have a comprehensive methodology document available. It's in the form of tens of pages, so it's a substantial document, and it will give you that detail. The methodology is very much tailored to the different types of technologies and uses the best available information. I'm going to break the methodology down into three. One being our regional engagement, find out what our stakeholders' plans are. The second one is our connections pipeline. We already have a good understanding of what's coming because customers apply to connect, accept, and then we track those and we watch how they are developing. That connection pipeline is key to understand what's happening in the region, especially in the short term, the sort of 5 to possibly up to 10 years for the pipeline. Now, the third is the bottom-up methodology. Varies between electric vehicles, heat pumps, and generation, for example. So EVs, in the short term, we find that the historic uptake of what's happened in the last couple of years is a good indicator, a bit like following the Jones. If my neighbour's got one, I might be the next person to get one. So we'll be using short term, and then we're looking to the policy impacts and what is required for net zero. Whereas heat pumps might be affected more by the building efficiency metrics, and that would be an indicator of when and where those heat pumps might be connected. Lots of comprehensive approaches to make sure that we're using the richness of the data available to us. Matt, was that okay, or do you want to add anything to that?
That was pretty comprehensive and pretty spot on.
Thank you.
So
Brilliant.
thank you.
Thank you, Jill. Thank you, Matt. We are nearly at time, but there are a couple of last questions that we'll try and squeeze in. So Mel, there's 2 questions for you. Is there any plan on the type of interaction do you anticipate between DFES and RESP? And part B, RESP is developing one scenario, I would guess, based on the DESNZ CP action plan. At the moment, we have 4 NESO pathways. So wondering if we're going to have multiple scenario pathways in the future or just one.
Yeah, thank you for that. They're both great questions. So on the first question of the relationship with DFES, I think that's really evolving at the moment. There's a very collaborative relationship between NESO and the DSOs. At the moment, I would say it's kind of very much in a sort of dynamic learning phase of understanding where we need to get to and how those interrelate. On the second question, it will be multiple pathways. So there's a recognition within the CP30 advice that we gave to government, a sense of we need to progress everything all at once. So there's there will very much continue to be multiple pathways, and I think sitting behind that as well, a recognition that in order to accelerate to the particularly to CP30, we need to be really sort of going at everything.
Rebecca, just to add to that, Mel, I think from my understanding of Ofgem's consultation, the rest will be a single pathway for the short term. I think the duration of that's to be determined. I think sort of 5 to 10 years have been mooted, and then there'll be multiple pathways after that. That's the consultation position.
Yeah, up to 2050. That's right, Jill.
Brilliant. Thank you, Mel. Thank you, Jill. I think we can probably fit in one more question. So there's a question for you, Jill. So as one of many local authorities looking at the potential of appointing a commercial decarbonisation partner, like Bristol City Leap, the commercial companies see such a programme working on the basis of large solar farms as well as heat networks. How could this work given the excess generation already planned in the queue?
Thanks, Rebecca. And it gives me an ideal opportunity, so thank you, to stress that the generation landscape and future generation is very much being dictated by CP 2030, and that is a work in progress at the moment. So please acknowledge that the generation forecasts within the 2024 DFES are based on a connection pipeline prior to connections reform and prior to the impact of CP 2030. When it comes to this specific question, which was about solar, the Clean Power 2030 results that came out, we are going through a process. Those results have come out on a regional basis. We now need to work with the NESO to interpret those in relation to the queue. We'll then be working with customers to look at, as Mel said, it's not just first come, first served anymore. It's first ready, first needed to be first connected. That's going to take some time. I know that Mary's explained it in the chat there. And realistically, it's going to be late summer into the autumn and winter before we're getting those connections out. With regard solar, CP 2030 has defined how much solar they consider is needed by 2030. It's not going beyond that yet, but by 2030, how much they need. When we look at our queue, indeed, I think we have got probably about 25% more than what Clean Power 2030 have said we need. So that will mean that some of that connection queue may well be postponed. I'm not going to say kicked out. I think there was some terminology here about sort of removing from the queue. It will be postponed because it's not required to meet that net zero as defined by the NESO.
Brilliant. Thanks for that, Jill. I am going to close the Q&A there. There are a couple of questions in the chat that we haven't got to, but as part of the follow-up, as I mentioned, I will be sending out the slides, the record, and we also send out a Q&A document which will detail all of the questions and the answers to them, including answers to those questions that we haven't managed to get to today. For more information on connections reform, Northern Power Grid are hosting a webinar next week. I think it's the 11th of February on that topic. So when I send out the slides and the recording from this webinar, I'll send out an Eventbrite link to that as well. Okay, so before we close, we are just going to launch a last couple of final polls. So this first poll is to get a bit of an understanding on what you will use the latest DFES for. So you've got 6 options there. Again, it's multiple choice. Understanding the scale of change required to meet net zero. Inform the way forward and policies of my organisation, identify opportunities to feed in information to Northern Power Grid, inspire my own decarbonisation plans and those of family and friends, a detailed analysis of greater than 10 million data points, or something else. And if it is something else, if you could, I would be welcome to get your answer on that in the chat, please. So we'll just give you a minute to fill that one in. We'll have a quick look at the results, and then we've got one more quick poll before we move to close. Thank you very much, everyone, for taking part in the polls. It is really, really useful insight to get your answers to some of these questions. Okay, it's slowed down a bit there, so I'm going to end that poll. I will share the results with you all, so hopefully you can see those there, and you can see top 2 responses there: understanding the scale of change required to meet net zero, and inform the way forward and policies of my organisation. We do have some other responses, so as I say, please do put those comments in the chat. Okay, we will launch the final poll now. So this one, so our scenarios show that to achieve the UK's legally binding net zero target by the end of the decade, we need 40% of cars to be EVs and 10% of homes to have heat pumps. Do you think that our region is on track to achieve this? Yes, we are on track. No, we are behind, or don't know. And again, I'll just give a moment there for you all to vote. And just wait till the answers start to slow down a little bit. Okay, in the interest of time, I'm just going to end the poll there and share the results. So you can see 66% of the audience there feeling that no, we are behind as a region to achieve that. Okay, I will stop sharing there and I will hand back to Jill.
Thanks, Rebecca. And thank you, everybody, for sharing that insight. It's fabulous to see so many of you looking to use the DFES in understanding net zero for our region and informing your policies. Excellent news. And yeah, it looks like we've got a long way to go, but it's great that we've got this interest, because with this interest, we are going to make a difference, which is fabulous. Just a quick plug, we have got 6 regional events planned. These are your opportunities. They're hybrid events, so you can come along and meet people face to face or join virtually. If you've got any more questions for our experts, you can come along to those events over the next 6 weeks or so. We've been bringing more experts to a place near you. It will include regional colleagues, connections teams. I know there was a question about connections there, and our operational teams. So I just really want to finish by reiterating our commitment to supporting decarbonisation in our region. Forecasting our customers' needs is critical to how we prepare to connect low carbon and major projects in our region and develop that network. So please engage with us. Come and knock on our door, push it down, make sure that we know what you're planning so that we can factor it in. Be really good to get any feedback on today's webinar, and there's a QA code there and also a survey. Thank you, everybody, and thank you to the team who've put such a lot of work into developing this year's DFES. Really appreciated. Excellent team effort. Thanks again.
Thank you, everyone. That's the end of today's session. So feel free to drop off the webinar. Thank you for your participation.
Thank you all for joining.